America great again. That's been a theme, and let's be clear here. President Trump and his enthusiasm has delivered 3.1% GDP growth over the last 3 quarters. Someone who's been supportive of that is French Hill of the 2nd District in Arkansas. We are so thrilled that he's with us, and Adam Posen with us with the Peterson Institute as well. Congressman, wonderful to have you here today. Senator Rounds was with us in South Dakota yesterday. He lives in Trump country. You live in Trump country. Do they waver? Do your Republicans in Arkansas, do they waver over all these scandals and discourse in Washington?
I think the main issue talked about at home revolves around trade more than the chattering classes in Washington talking about scandals. They are concerned about how does the trade conflict between China and the United States impact farm prices, for example, because Arkansas has farming as its biggest portion of its GDP.
The Secretary of Treasury, Mnuchin, Mr. Kudlow of the White House, their idea of an agricultural exercise is Saturday in the Hamptons in the summer. What do you tell the fancy Wall Street guys when you meet with them over it? You go to the Trump Tower Hotel, you sit at the bar with your sparkling soda,
too expensive.
And you get too expensive. You got to tell those guys what it's like out there in the real world. What do you say to the Wall Street guys?
Well, I say that the steel and aluminum tariffs across the board, for example, is something I didn't support. I feel like targeted tariffs very specifically is the only way to go, which is the 301 action is a much more sophisticated approach, which I think could produce a good bilateral discussion between China and America that's overdue in many categories. But look, retaliation is frequently against American farm products. This is, you've seen the EU list, you've seen the China list, and when people are putting their soybeans in the ground, that's why they're concerned. They want an administration that pushes for more market access, reduces non-tariff barriers. They want that, but they also are concerned when they think it's going to be across-the-board impact, negative impact.
Should the U.S. not just, deal with China in intellectual property? Right, because as soon as you start touching anything else, then you don't have the support of your allies, you don't have the support of Europe.
Well, I agree that the EU and the United States have intellectual property theft, and licensing is a big heart of the decision, and I think we'll work together on that. I think we'll have that as an allied point.
Okay, so what would you target when you say you do much more targeted tariffs or trade tensions? What would you do?
Well, what I'm saying is that the 301 action, where we identify the worst behavior of China category by category, including intellectual property under 301, is the way to go. What I'd like to see is that we have an intensive bilateral discussion, not unlike America and Japan had in the late 1980s, and try to resolve some of these issues.
Congressman, that's right where I wanted to go with Adam Posen. That tweet 2 or 3 days ago from the president, this distinction of bilateral versus multilateral is key. 2-part question. Is multilateral dead, and is President Trump's bilateral my way or the highway?
President Trump's bilateral is an attempt to bully and use excessive leverage, and which would be okay if it worked, but it's not going to work, because just as Francine was raising with the congressman, on some of these really big issues like intellectual property theft and forced tech transfer, you need a multilateral solution. And yet the second point is multilateral in the sense of we're going to have one big round and get everybody on board and have the Brazilians and the Indians and everyone sing Kumbaya is out. Plurilateral, whether it's the TPP, EU, Japan, US, EU, Japan, Australia coming together on tech, that's in.
Well, and just a surveillance note, we heard last night all Republicans in Washington singing Kumbaya. You wanted to speak, Congressman.
Well, I just say, look, at the TPP that was signed recently in Lima, they take out the intellectual property aspects of it.
They actually don't, but that's okay.
Well, that's the view of a lot of people in the United States.
I understand, but if you actually read the text or talk to the governments, that's not true.
These discussions here, these back and forth, going down to the fine print versus the heat in the moment where you got to get reelected, and that comes back to, in your case, the people of the 2nd District in Arkansas. They don't trust Washington. That's a fact. How do guys like you get that linkage back, that trust back, where a domestic America trusts our international expansion? How do we rekindle that, Congressman?
Well, I'd say over 240 years, there's not a lot of trust between localities and Washington, if you look historically. But I think the way people see is they want to see things get done, like the tax cuts bill, like bills that are pro-growth, that produce the economic growth you talked about, produce the 1.1 million
jobs. Do you support a $1 trillion deficit?
I don't.
Well, then what happened? I saw you out in the garden at that signing, and, you know, a lot of other people were way more enthused than French Hill about it because you're a fiscal conservative. How can you support all of these different theories of tax policy when you and the people of the 2nd District are going to enjoy chronic trillion-dollar deficits?
Well, as you in your previous panel, we were going to have chronic deficits to begin with. No, Adam, you're wrong about that, and I think the statistics show it. Here's the deal. We've got 2/3 of our budget growing at twice the economic growth rate. And Adam? That's what needs to be reformed. And that's the key point.
Dr. Posen, final word, please.
Yeah. The part of the budget that's growing that fast is the health care, and that's not going to kick in for about 30 years. The bulge of 1.5% of GDP a year, which is more than $200 billion a year in deficits, is due to the tax cuts.
I disagree. We'll talk about it another time.
Right. Well, we'll talk about it, you know, another time, like 3 minutes from now. Congressman Hill, thank you so much for joining us this morning. French Hill is from the 2nd District of Arkansas. We'll continue with Adam Posen after we medicate him to get him to the next block over tax policy. Please stay with us in Washington. Francine Lacqua, Tom Keene. Don't forget our charts worldwide. This is really cool. French Hill's Bloomberg terminal in his office up on Capitol Hill. He can see all of these charts on Arkansas dynamics. This is Bloomberg.